Okay, good evening and welcome to the November 14th, 2017 regular school board meeting. Can I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Craig?
Here.
Mr. Estheimer?
Present.
Mr. Freitas?
Here.
Mr. Green?
Here.
Mr. Koopser?
Here.
Ms. Reed?
Here.
Dr. Pomponio?
Here. Okay, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Southgate Community Schools mission statement is learning for life. Vision statement is Southgate Community Schools, the best choice for students and parents. Are there any citizen comments at this time? Okay. Are there any revisions to the agenda? Okay, if not, can I have an approval, motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? I have a motion by Mr. Craig and a support by Mr. Green. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Okay. No citizen comments. We're moving on to presentations. We have Mr. Nate Lay for the facilities report.
Mr. Lay had a family emergency and is not joining us tonight. I'll reschedule that presentation.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to the transportation RFP review, Mrs. Amy Cecina, Plant Moran. Thank you.
So at the last meeting, we discussed our transportation and the need to have an RFP during this year that for our 2018-19 school year. Our contract will be up with our current provider. So we discussed having the assistance of Plant Moran to facilitate this. And Amy is here to just go over what will happen during the RFP process and to answer any questions that the board may have about what they're looking for during this process.
Thanks everyone for having me here to kind of walk you through the process. A brief presentation just to walk you through the steps that we're going to take for the RFP. And so kind of throughout we're going to do project management, which is pretty typical, and I'll talk you through the details of each of these. The first phase, which we are about to start, is the data collection and review. We're then going to prepare an RFP. We'll help the district manage the bid process, and then we're going to help the district evaluate and select a vendor. So the project management, we'll hold a kickoff. We've provided the district with a list of documents that are helpful to us in developing the RFP. And I'll talk through that a little more in a minute here. We have a collaboration center so that any documents can be uploaded to our site, makes it nice and easy. And then we move right into phase one, which is really the meat of where everything starts. Thank you. So we provided a document request list to the district, and that lists everything that is helpful for us to develop the RFP. It includes the 4094s and the 4159s, and those are forms that the district has to fill out every year that provide information on your on the transportation services. It helps us identify some of the financial information, some of the mileage quantities, the trip quantities, things such as that. On that list, we also ask for how many different special trips are taken, how many what days of the week the various routes are run, information about the routes. And so we ask a lot of really detailed information. And so we'll work with the district and also with your current provider, Trinity, to obtain that information. We'll also meet with key staff to make sure that we really understand the needs of transportation, whether the current contract is meeting all those needs, if we need to add or change anything. And then we take that and develop it into the RFP. And so as part of our RFP process, we'll work with the district to determine what criteria we're going to use to select the vendor, what they're evaluated on. We're going to use the information that we are provided through the meetings and through the documents to define the requirements, and then we'll work to release the RFP. We usually let vendors have probably somewhere between 3 to 4 weeks to respond. In that time, we'll hold a meeting on site to, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit. In that time frame when the bid is out, we'll hold a meeting on site to let the vendors have an opportunity to really understand the transportation process here. We tend to get a lot of questions on transportation bids. Each vendor ends up submitting somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 40 questions, just depending on the nature of the vendor, but that's pretty common. So we manage that, and we'll work with the district to answer any questions that we can't answer. And then we'll have the bid opening. And then we get the proposals back, and we'll work through analyzing the proposals, making sure they're apples to apples. We usually issue a few rounds of clarifications to the vendors. And then we'll work with the district. We'll do some interviews of the top, usually the top 2 vendors. We'll help do some reference checking. A lot of times we ask the district to do the reference checking too, because they get more candid feedback. And then if it makes sense, do some site visits as well. And then work with Southgate to identify which vendor we want to go with, whether it's the current one or a different one going forward. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Does anybody have any questions?
Madam President,
Mrs. Reed?
did you say that the district does the background checks?
The reference checks?
The reference checks.
So typically, the district does do the reference checks because we find that they get more candid feedback. We provide some standard questions, and we can assist, but a lot of times if they know that an external company's on the phone, you don't get as candid feedback. So this would be when you talk to other districts. And it's a similar process that we followed when we assisted with the custodial and grounds RFP.
President? And could you explain to me your timeline? I mean, I see that your steps, your phases 0 through 4. When are you looking to be completed with your evaluation? What's the duration for each of the steps?
So the RFP, our goal is to get out sometime in the January timeframe. And we would do evaluation in February and March. Do the due diligence activities, so the interviews and the reference checks, probably the March-April timeframe, and make a selection in April.
Madam President, so the Board of Education has established a goal this year for investigating the possibility of increasing our transportation services again, because we're really limited to what we're required to provide for special education students, and very limited athletic and extra trip kind of transportation.
Right.
So one of the things that the district is interested in is getting some assistance to determine costs to the district of what if we provided transportation just to this group of students, or what if we returned to a system previously where there were sites around the district where parents could drop their students off and there would be a bus to pick them up. We don't currently own any buses, so that would be leasing those buses or contracting for all of those busing services. There's definitely some interest in looking into that. The district is considerably downsized from the point which we previously had transportation, so I don't know how helpful our previous numbers would be. How can Plant Moran assist us in getting to some of that information as well?
So we can work with Teresa and find out exactly what options you're looking at. I think the original process, that may change the timeline a little
Absolutely.
bit. The original plan was to get something in place by April because your contract does expire in June. So I think it'll involve a little more investigation to determine exactly what we want to look at, but we can include that as an option as part of the RFP, and ask the vendors to provide some costing.
And thinking about that, the scenario that I just described, what would be a reasonable amount of time that might be added to the timeline for this RFP to get those additional options?
I think we'd need to look at the various options in spend some time thinking about how much we want to look at it versus having the vendor look at it. So I think a lot of it would be providing some information to us, and then we would provide it back to the vendor. So it'd probably add, off the top of my head, maybe a month. I'm not sure. We'll look into it a little more and find out, if we can fit that in the timeline as well. It may be something where we might want to move forward with one vendor and then have that as an option also.
I think that's an important discussion tonight because you're looking at a timeline that's based on just replacing what we currently have, just in time for the contract to expire. And you've talked at length about wanting to expand at least the information to the board, looking forward for whether or when additional transportation services would be available to the students.
And then also, who would be able to figure out what other sources for funding the transportation? Would that be the finance department, or can you help with that too?
To fund the transportation process?
That was part of our goal, to look at funding. Are there options?
Yeah, I don't know that that's something that necessarily we would help for. We can definitely work with Teresa on that, but I think it'd probably be more something that the district would look into.
Okay.
Madam President?
Mr. Gibson?
And as it relates to an RFP process, which is a very formal and sometimes very lengthy and costly process, especially for the bidders, if we were to look for, and I don't know what we currently have plans in terms of our ability to extend the transportation to additional options to students, is there another process that Point Moran can potentially explore, such as like an RFI type of process that might be able to get us more of a ballpark idea of, or does it have to go through a full RFP process and get bids, that we might be able to get an answer sooner to give us an idea of generally what the cost may be without having to go through full proposals?
Yeah, so I think there's some advantages to including it as part of the overall proposal process as an option, just because I think the pricing you would get would be better because you would be bundling it together, whereas if you have you could potentially have two separate vendors in here if you look at it at a different time. We can definitely do an RFI process just to get some ballpark figures. I don't think it would save the vendors any time. I know you mentioned that it's a pretty lengthy process for the vendors. The vendors are still going to have to come in and really investigate. They're going to have to look at what the potential routes would be, where the potential stops would be, and we'd work with the district as well to determine where you think it makes sense to have stops based on kind of where your population is. So we could potentially do an RFI process as well. I don't know that it would save a significant amount of time.
And that was my concern, because the routes, we couldn't use the previous information because we have gone from 6 elementaries to 4, and then Davidson Middle School is now 3 grades. Even the high school added the 9th grade. So we don't have much former information that somebody, could just take the information and then try to price it out. That it's going to be a bit more complicated because we would have to start from scratch with routes.
In what it may be too, and we'll look into this a little bit, but it might be, it may make sense to extend your current contract, and I don't even know if that's a possibility, for a certain amount of time while we're investigating this, or, we could potentially award them as 2 separate contracts as well. I think it requires a little more investigation on our part.
So the current contract is up 2018. What month?
June of 2018.
Okay. And for the viewing audience, can you explain the difference between RFI and RFP?
Yep, so an RFI is a less formal process. It's more of a request for information, so the vendors aren't bound to anything. They're just providing information for the district to make some decisions on. Typically, you would go from an RFI to an RFP process, so you would have some of the base information, then ask the vendors to formalize it in a more formal process. And then if you just do an RFP process to begin with, you eliminate the step of the RFI if you know that you're going to go a certain direction. So if we were strictly going with replacing the current services, we would do an RFP. It'd be 1 step and it'd be done. And you would have a vendor contract at the end of that RFP process.
Any other questions from the board?
My question might be what might be the next steps from the board is, this is going to require some additional conversation. Is that something that you're interested in doing at this point in the board meeting, moving it to a work session, and then, delaying that a little bit further, referring it to one of your committees? I think that it would be, considering the timelines and the options of even talking about, do we want to extend the current contract for a period of time in order to really do a more comprehensive look at expanding transportation services? At what point would the board like to have that conversation, and through what venue?
So how long do you think that the extension would have to be for a good thorough search of the information?
I think the tricky part is if you extend the contract, it's somewhat hard to switch in the middle of the school year. And so at that point, do you want to extend it through June of the following year, or do you want to switch perhaps over a holiday break, which would kind of be another good breaking point? With your current contract, you have year-round transportation. So while June is a good point because it's a lower level of transportation, it is still, you don't really have a full stopping point. So there's considerations there. Could we do, I don't think I'd recommend switching like in August. I think there's just too many things that you could run into with a new vendor, switching right before school starts back up. So I think if you don't do it in June, the earliest I'd recommend would be over the holiday break in December.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that we would recommend that you extend it a year, a calendar year. That would be the most sensible timeline in terms of being able to make a change if the vendor in fact changed.
And we can reach to some vendors over the next week or so and find out some information, just, how long it would take them to really do some of the investigation that they'd need to do as well.
Okay. And Mr. Koopser, can we add that to the Finance Committee so we can have further discussion on that?
Sure.
Just as a point of consideration, the Finance Committee is not, the meeting that we normally would have had for November falls on Thanksgiving break, so it's unlikely that the Finance Committee would be able to have a meeting until well into December. That might not be the best timeline for additional conversation, if there's a way to talk about it more quickly.
Can we discuss it at the next meeting? Can we put it on the work agenda?
Yeah, we can put it on the work
Discuss
session
it
for
at
the
next
next.
Your next meeting, you were planning on a fairly lengthy closed session, and so that's just something to consider, how much you can put on that agenda for the 28th.
So what is our timeline between now and having some discussions and decisions about what we want to do, either with an extension or more information?
So I think the goal with, if we stick with the current plan just to renew it in June, or to renew or change vendors in June, would be to get an RFP out in January. I think regardless, we'll start investigating some of that. So whether or not we have a decision before then, we can continue moving along that path as though that is what we're going to do, and investigate the other options in the meantime. So it might take us a little bit of time too to really figure out how long it would take to incorporate the entire the entire transportation option.
Mr. Craig?
How fine-tuned would you need our direction by January to get it into the RFP? I mean, would you need to know specific routes, or would you just need to know an area, an amount of students? I mean,
so I need to talk to some vendors.
Okay.
So over the next few days, I'll talk to some vendors and find out. I don't think we need to know specific routes. I think we can let the vendors figure some of that out, but I think that we would need to know, it sounded like there may be centralized locations that you'd be looking to take the kids to, rather than having it be at each subdivision or, every few roads.
one of the, for an example, one of the options we were saying was target any school, and you say, okay, this area around it, we don't transport, because they can make it there by walking very easily or being dropped off. Outside of that area, we need to transport. So, or maybe just at the high school, not transporting at all. So I guess that's the kind of decisions we need to make.
So those kind of,
Get to you.
Yeah, so those kind of decisions, I think, need to be determined before we ask the vendors to provide any information.
Okay.
And so I think the decision if you can provide that information in January, we could get that into an RFP.
So like an area and the number of students would
Yeah.
would be helpful.
Yeah, you know, if we don't want to bus within 2 miles of this, or within a mile of this school, as long as there's sidewalks, or 2 miles, you know, that's kind of the standard of what a lot of districts do. But we know we have, you know, X number of students that live outside of this area, and we'd be looking for the vendors to provide, you know, X number of stops along the way. So I think another decision point is how often do you want the drivers to stop? Because that makes a big difference. So do you want them to gather at a few central locations to be taken to the elementary school, or do you want them to stop at every street?
And these would just be options on the RFP. So basically, we would have our core proposal, and then these would be.
Right. So there's no
options
harm in
would be-
asking for that type of information
Right.
as an option. I think we just need to know a little more detail about what you're looking to accomplish.
You need some direction, I get it.
Because the costs are significantly different. You know, a lot of districts used to stop at every house, and then it moved away from that. Now they stop, you know, at every street or every few streets. And the cost changes significantly based on that process.
Madam President.
Mr. Cooper.
Thank you. Ms. McLaughlin, as it relates to the budget item that's on our budget here, I'm looking at pupil transportation services with a budget of $865,100. Is that what the RFP would be for those services that were covered in that budget line item?
Well, they would propose a bid.
No, I'm understanding that they would,
But
with
that-
the RFP
those
process. I'm saying,
areas,
is that what we're looking for to
that's most of
RFP?
it.
Is roughly about that
That
figure?
includes our special ed bus routes, our special ed sedan services, our vocational education busing, and small amounts for alternative education busing that we have worked into grants, and our athletic
Good.
transportation. There are some charters that are done through our student activity groups, so that wouldn't be in there, but that's a relatively small amount.
Okay. I'm just making the connections as to, so we're trying to replace that with a formal RFP as it relates to the existing services, which contract ends at the end of this year. And part of what I understood was part of the board goal was not only to figure out what are the pricing if we wanted to reintroduce transportation back to the district for busing students to and from school, which I would imagine is probably more expensive than what we have here as a budget item. And I'm just guessing. I imagine it's just a lot more activity.
It's all additional.
Yeah.
So it's all additional. I'm thinking to myself, we have pretty much dedicated most of the millage spend already that's expended out for a couple of years. For us to get to a number that's somewhere close to upwards of $1 million for these, I don't know if we want to spend the time to do a full-blown RFP to get a number that we realize that we maybe can't afford until we have a lot more changes in the meantime. That's all I'm trying to make, is connect the dots of what we can ask for it. We get a real formal proposal, but I don't know if we can afford it at this point, considering the obligations we've already made and how much it's already costing for what we have to provide. So that's my personal opinion on some discussion of it.
I agree, because one of the main goals is just to get the pricing options and look at what our options are, and not to do a full-blown RFP on what it would be.
And our current contractor that we've had, this is our 5th year. We originally had a 3-year contract, and then the board, they approved a 2-year extension. And at that time, I made the commitment to the board that we would send out an RFP, because it's been 5 years since we've done that. So I think it's a good idea to do it, with the goal of what we have now with some options, so that we know what the cost is.
I wasn't objecting to the idea of taking transportation services to the market to get a fair price, a competitive price. It was just the robustness of the option of expanding, considering we don't know how to fund it just yet.
We could potentially add it as an option, just so that you know, and you could look for it in future years as well.
Right.
So, you know, we just need some basic parameters about, you know, these are the schools we want to provide transportation to. Nothing within X number of miles, and we want to make approximately, you know, this many stops for the school.
So in this particular contract, we want to look out for where there's congestion too, so we want to make sure that we have safe routes as well. Ms. Reed, did you have something?
I did. To dovetail off of Mr. Kupser, on the line item for what we have allocated, I know that with special education services, let's say Beacon, those kids might be spread out in different zip codes, so that money comes back to us from those districts. Is this encompassing everything we pay, and then that money is somewhere else where we can see a difference, or is this that money after everything else?
That is our total cost. We do not get the money from the other districts. We get, well, we get the FTE
Right,
from them.
yes.
And then we get an additional 70.16% for the special ed transportation costs, additional special ed funding.
So is that incorporated all in this, or is that to be deducted from this from another line item?
That's the total expenses. The revenue is on the revenue side. So it's not netted. That is
Right.
the gross amount that we pay.
So can the board see that figure when, I know we look at this line item, but for what comes in towards it, so what our actual payout is?
Beacon students that come from other districts, the transportation is provided by their transportation services.
Okay, but those students that we get, no, we get a part of their FTE.
But they're, I mean, they're buses, we're using their
Well,
district
right,
buses.
we pay to transport our students,
Right.
our special ed students, to where they need to go. So they need other Act 18 programs that we don't provide. So we pay for those services, and the transportation from other districts into Beacon is paid by those districts.
Okay, so is there an amount that can come off of this that we know is subsidized from this amount from any other place?
Other than the state aid, that it's based, most of it is based on the special ed.
Right.
It's the special ed busing. So we get, the 70% is an additional, I don't have the number in front of me, but I can
Right.
provide it to you.
But I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
so we would take this number and deduct that revenue source
Right.
to know exactly what we pay?
Our net cost,
Yes,
yes.
yes. If we could look at that, that might be helpful too.
Okay, that sounds good. Mr. Estheimer?
Just dovetailing now off of what Mrs. Mossop was talking about. So the Special Education Center Program Fund, there's a budget in there of 3,000, but how is that different than just special education busing throughout the district?
What is the 3,000?
It's under pupil transportation.
Oh,
services.
under the Beacon program?
Is that the Special Education Center Program
That's
Fund?
for special transportation, like if they need a cab. If there are situations when we have to call a cab, if they
Okay.
need, for a particular day, they need just an individual vehicle for transportation.
there's
It's
not a
something
dollar
that's
amount.
not part of our normal routes,
Got
but
it.
that we do have to provide to them.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Okay, no other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to student government representatives, we have the Anderson High School Quiz Bowl. Thank you.
And as they're coming up, Jen Furkis is their coach, and I will let her tell you a little bit about herself and her crew.
Aren't they cute? They're so literal. They want to do everything right. Well, I think most of you already know me. My name is Jen Furkis. I'm a teacher at Southgate Anderson High School. I have the immense privilege of being the Quiz Bowl coach, and I also have actually all of these students in my AP history class. I don't know why I didn't realize that a minute ago. And I also teach government at the high school. So first, I wanted to thank you for supporting the Quiz Bowl team and for allowing us to come and speak tonight, and for me to just talk a little bit about the really awesome young people that we have and the way they've represented our school and our district over the past couple of seasons. So we're a relatively young team. We had one season last year, which was our first time getting the team back together. And last season we went 5-4 during the regular season. We had 5 wins against Romulus, Annapolis, Carlson, Huron, and Dearborn. And then the way they do it is they seed you, and you have like a playoff tournament. And so in the tournament, we did exceptional. We won our first 2 matches, and then our third match was against Huron High School, and it came down to a tiebreaker, and we were so sure we were moving on and going to go to the state tournament, and they caught us on the last question. So we lost by 1 question, but it was okay. It was a great first season for us. It was a tough loss, but we were just really proud of ourselves, and the kids were great. We graduated some notable seniors who I feel compelled that I need to mention them because they really, through their leadership and example to the other kids, I feel like they were the ones who really helped our team grow this year. I only have 4 here right now, but on any given Friday, after school on a Friday, you can find about 20 kids in my classroom getting there as quickly as possible so they can get a buzzer. Otherwise, they have to do this or buzz and try to make their voices heard. Our 3 seniors we graduated last year were Garrett Brown, Stephanie Lee, and Marissa Robeson, all who are in college right now. They were just phenomenal students. They were student athletes. They were on student council. And so it was just a natural transition to them to also be really great leaders for our Quiz Bowl team. This year, we're off to a great start. I don't want to jinx us. We're 6-1 right now. We have the most front-loaded schedule of any team downriver. So far, I had to write it down. We have wins against Wyandotte, yes. Sorry, Wyandotte. Any Wyandotte residents. Flat Rock, Gibraltar Carlson, who was so mad. God bless them, they stormed out, but were gracious as they stormed out. They lost by 1 question. They were so mad at us. Romulus, Dearborn, and Truman. Our only loss this season came to Riverview, who I'm starting to dislike immensely, because last year Riverview beat us by 2 questions. This year Riverview beat us by 2 questions. In round 4, the final round of any match, the questions are worth 20 points. I hate it when it's a nail biter and we're close, and I believe we were tied. I'd have to look at my notes, but I believe we were tied going into round 4, and any time that happens, everybody's like, all right, take a deep breath. Don't buzz in if you don't, because then if you buzz in and you don't know, then the whole team, no one can talk. So it's just very nerve-wracking, and I'm not an anxious person anyway, but I could like strip the wood of the pencil at that point. I just get so nervous for them. We lost by 2 questions. It's okay, we're gonna get them in the tournament. We have 2 more matches left. We play December 18th. We have 2 matches, one against Redford Union and the other against Huron High School, and hopefully we can make it to the state tournament this year at Michigan State University. So thank you so much for the transportation budget, because we're going to use it, please Lord. We'll see. I'm really excited because they are just a phenomenal group of kids to work with. Anybody who knows me, like I don't like to be out of my classroom. I hate to miss, and I especially hate to miss AP. And I don't like when my students miss, even if they're missing with me. I want them in class. But it's great. It's a great experience. They get to meet other Quiz Bowl coaches who are also teachers. They get to meet other students who are academically minded. The handout that I gave you is one that I use to recruit students, and also obviously through them with word of mouth to kind of give them an idea of what Quiz Bowl is like. Because a lot of kids immediately are like, oh, I could never be on Quiz Bowl. I'm not smart enough. And that's really not true. We're looking for someone who's well-rounded and who enjoys different things. There are a lot of questions on pop culture, which I know nothing about. There are a lot of sports questions. There are a lot of religious and art and music questions. And sometimes the quietest, shyest, non-academic student really gets a chance to blossom. And we have shirts, which I would have told them to wear them, but we just wore them yesterday. yesterday for our 2 matches that we played, because when we go and we look like a team. And I'm really proud of them. We've come really far in just a year. Last year when we started, we kind of started a little bit late, and they worked us in, and so we started off kind of rough. We lost our first 3 matches. And then we won the next couple, and then we lost one, and then we won the rest of them. And people were like, what is Southgate doing? And this year, other teams are nervous to play us. So that's a good feeling. But these kids are so humble and gracious. After every match, they get up without any prompting at all. They shake hands with the other team. They tell them good job. It's a blessing. So I don't know if I've probably talked over my allotted time, but do you have any questions for me or the students? I should
introduce them to
I was
us?
just going to say, I should introduce them. This is Jessica Lee. Her sister Stephanie was on the team last year. This is Lexi Nadolski. This is Anari Gardner, and that's Ben Altizer. And Anari is a senior, and Henry Pocchini, who also plays with us regularly, is a senior, and Nathan Schooner is a senior. Jessica is a junior. Lexi is a junior, so I'm going to bring them back, right? I'm going to bring them back. Okay. And Ben is a 10th grader, and I have several other, we have a really young team still. So I would imagine that we will continue to have this type of success. So maybe some money next year, too, would be good. But hopefully we'll have some continued success later on, because it would be really nice to be able to take them to play against kids from other counties and see the state.
Mr. Essheimer?
Yeah, I just, first of all, congratulations. I wanted to ask, where is the December 18th match, is that at the high school?
No, that's a great question. I should have probably told you so you can come and cheer us on. All of our matches are open to the public, so feel free. We play at 11:30 against RU and 12:15 against Huron High School. We play at Wayne County Community College. In the upstairs, but I can send the information to you of the room number. Okay. And we do actually have several parents, like Diana Brown, Garrett's mom. You know, her boys are all gone now. She comes every time and cheers us on. Marissa's mom, Vicki Venner, has come quite a bit to cheer us on as well. So we love a cheering section. The guy's a little strict about smiling, so just try to keep it a little reserved for us, but that would be great.
Great. See you there.
Thank you.
Do they get any kind of idea of what the questions will be like for each?
No.
Or just it's random?
They just know, every Quiz Bowl match has 4 different rounds. The first round is just toss-ups. So they're all Jeopardy-style questions. The guy will read them off. So you have to really be a good listener. The kids will get scrap paper so they can write down parts of the question if they want to. And then whoever buzzes in first, they get to answer. They can buzz in before the question is done being read, and if they're correct, that's awesome. If they're incorrect, then their whole team is disqualified from that question. So then our kids would wait till the end of the question being read, and then they would buzz in if they know it. Round 2 is a bonus round, so they read a main question, and if you get it right, then you get 4 bonus questions. And they go to your team first. And they can be about anything, I don't know. One of them, one time, I thought he was going to cry. He was so happy. It was had to do with Harry Potter, and you knew either all 4, you got all 4 of them, or you got nothing. And of course, Ben knew all 4. So we swept that category. If no one gets the main question right, then no one gets the bonuses. If your team gets the main question right, but you don't get any of the bonuses, the other team gets a chance to answer. Round 3 is always a lightning round. Yesterday, our topics were geography, world history, and American history. Wisely, they chose American history because their American history teacher was there. And then in the other game, that was also one of the lightning round topics. So whoever the team is that's not winning at the beginning of round 3 gets to pick first. And so the other team got to pick first, and then our kids got to pick second. And it's just, you get 15 questions, as many as you can answer correctly in 2 minutes. It's 10 questions. If you get all 10 questions right and you run the category, they call it, you get an extra 20 points bonus, which we've done that one time. It was really cool. Round 4 is just like round one toss-ups, but they're 20 points each. So really, if a team is behind going into round 4, they still have a chance to make up. So you never really know until usually about the middle part of round 4 how you're going to come out. But they persevere.
So how much time is invested with these students, like in the competitions? And
Well, I'm always teaching them, Dr. Pomponio. No. We practice every Friday. It's not mandatory. I don't make them show up. They usually, any given practice will be Ben and Jess hurriedly, plugging all the buzzers together, praying they work. Everybody else taking a current events quiz that I give them. I give them a news quiz every week that they have to do because those are at least 4 of our questions at our matches. We say we're going to practice from 2:45 to 3:30. This past week we were still there at 10 to 4, and I had, Mr. Martin called me. He's like, Jen, are you not done yet? I got parents up. I'm like, oh, I forgot. I mean, we just lose track of time. We are all nerds who love to learn, and I just go longer. So, and they don't mind either. So usually about a little over an hour a week we'll practice. We practiced more in the beginning because our schedule was so front-loaded. Our last 2 matches are December 18th. Riverview, our nemesis, their last 2 matches are February 5th. So we will not know if we get first place until February 5th. We need them to lose. Sorry. We'll see what happens.
good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for coming. Okay. Okay, moving on to committee reports. Anti-bullying. We discussed an open item of setting a meeting for interested parents who want to start the PTO. So we haven't really looked at the time or the schedule with the middle school yet, but we're going to talk about that further. We also reviewed the Stop It software and an option to be covered under grant funds. And our next meeting is December 7th at 4:30. And our standard meeting times they're always on the first Thursdays of the month. Finance Committee?
We haven't had a finance committee since the last board meeting. We're looking to get the next one scheduled the first week of December, and in that meeting, along with the regular, or the agenda, we'll be also selecting dates for the following year. Previously, at the beginning of the year, we had standard finance meetings being the last Wednesday of the week, or month. The last Wednesday of the 4th week of the month or something like that was how we selected it last year. We'll be opening that up to whatever the committee feels is appropriate for the following year. That's all I've got right now.
Okay, thank you. So policy, we reviewed, Mrs. Cretion joined us, and we reviewed the Neola updates. So we have those ready to go to an action item. Next meeting is December 5th at 5:30, and again, a standard time is the first Thursday of the month at 5:30. Legislative, Ms. Mossop.
I was not at the last committee meeting. I've been out of town, back and forth to the East Coast, and I had some information today, but unfortunately I can't get on the internet, so I will forward that to you, Dr. Pomponio, to review at our next meeting, which I believe is December 4th as well.
It's the December 7th?
Or December 7th.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Curriculum, I don't have anything to report. We haven't met yet for the month. Our next meeting is November 16th at 4:30. Personnel.
We just met today at about an hour and a half ago with Jerry, or Mr. Warren, and Ms. Cretion joined us, Ms. McLaughlin. Talked somewhat about the certification process, but the gist of the conversation was if this board deems, coming up here in a few minutes, to move forward with a recommendation for a superintendent, the beginning of what negotiations or beginning process of what we may be putting forth to Ms. Pastor in the form of a contract. Our next meeting, we were under the gun. I think we made it in here by 3 minutes, so we did not discuss the next meeting, so that will be forthcoming.
Thank you. And our grounds and maintenance, the November 14th meeting, which was today, was canceled for other priorities. It's rescheduled for the December 12th, first board meeting of the month date, and it's set on the calendar for 6 p.m. for the first board meeting of the month, which is it's the second Tuesday of the month. And that's it for that. Moving on to discussion, Mrs. McLaughlin, finance report.
Well, this week is a pretty big week for the finance department because we have finalized we had to do a transition with our payroll system through Wayne County RESA. The system that they had was pretty old and antiquated and no longer was supported, so they are spending this 17, 18 year transitioning all the districts. So we were on the earlier side of that, not the first ones. But we had our payroll specialist has been to RESA the last 2 pays where they've run parallel pays with the new system, and this Friday is the first live pay on the new program. So we had a finance consultant from RESA to finalize everything. We spent a lot of time making sure everything is correct and we're very confident that Friday will be run very smoothly, and stop laughing. So it's a little nerve-wracking for our office because payroll is very important, but the training process and the conversion process has been just phenomenal with RESA, and they even had a meeting with finance directors who are in the immediate time frame of the conversion to give us new guidelines for reviewing things with the new system. So we're going to push the button tomorrow, but I'm confident everything will go well. We've accounted for all the differences to know that they're normal, and that everyone's included and nobody's excluded. So it's been a big project. And our other focus has been on preparing an amended budget for the board. My goal in the timeline is to present just the general fund amended budget at the December 19th board meeting for the board. There is a lot of changes, as you recall, back in June. Didn't know a whole lot, especially with the School Aid Act not being approved until July 14th, and there's just been a lot of different changes with the supplemental bill, and so it's going to be quite a change. So there's just a lot involved with this budget amendment. We're trying to make sure we've got everything included. That's it.
Okay. Any question, Mr. Koopser?
Yes. I can't imagine that it must be a whole lot of work for that transition to a new payroll system and all the regression analysis you had to do to make sure everyone does get a paycheck this Friday.
Yep.
And it's really important to a lot of the people.
Even the board members.
Yes.
You're on there.
So I hope that your diligence finds that everything goes perfectly. Additionally, as it relates to your amended budget proposal for the December 19th meeting, would you think that there would be an update that would be able to be provided to the Finance Committee the first week of December as it relates to that topic, or would it be too premature to ask for that?
I think that's a very good possibility. So I would plan for it.
Okay, I'll make sure it's on the agenda then.
Yes. And as far as the transition and what's gone into it, so for the last 2 pays prior to this Friday, as soon as we have finished processing the pay on the old system, my payroll specialist spent 2 days, the next 2 days at RESA, rekeying everything into the new system, and then it was reviewed with a payroll specialist, finance specialist at RESA to make sure everything came out identical, and if it didn't, why not? There were a couple, they're still it's a little bit of a still work in process. Every district, I think they see something that they need to adjust for, nothing horrible. But that's the purpose of doing the parallels. So it has been quite a task.
Are you going
But my payroll person feels it's a much better system, so I'm very encouraged.
Are you going to continue to look at to make sure it's still working?
I'm sorry?
Are you going to, let's say, after this week, to make sure that maybe if there's any issues, you're going to look at it again in terms
Oh, yes,
of?
yes. Well, it's my understanding that a payroll specialist won't be out. They're always available at RISA, but I will go through the same steps that I went through today, and double checking things, making sure that I look at totals and compare them from one pay to the next to make sure that they're reasonable, given whatever changes there were. So this pay, we're paying credit hours that are part of the contracts. So we know that pay should have increased by that amount, and then we looked at other differences from this pay to last pay. And I also checked my paycheck to make sure it came out the same.
So now, everything's going to run smoothly.
It
but-
is.
But if anything happens, or if there's anything that breaks down, would the support be on RISA's side, or would it?
Yes.
Okay.
So I will say that, and the earliest that we can process pay, and it's what we generally do, is it goes out on Tuesday. So the transmission goes to the bank on Tuesdays. We have until Wednesday, and they did a test. The last word I heard, it didn't go through. I don't want anyone to panic. The plan is it will go through tomorrow. So they had to look at a couple things. So they weren't panicked. The plan was to transmit the payroll tomorrow anyways. So, but yeah, it would be, if there was any problem tomorrow, they would work until 8 or, whatever they needed to make sure it went through. We actually had, a few years ago, when the city changed to our bank, they kind of had a little mix-up with our files when they were doing their test file, and RISA worked until 8 or 9 o'clock that night to figure out what went wrong, and it was at the bank's end, but to make sure that our pay went through. So,
Good.
but we still have plenty of time to work with.
Any other questions for Ms. McLaughlin? Okay, thank you. Okay, the curriculum report, Mrs. Pastor.
So I asked Mr. Hemick to join me tonight for a combined report. So in the spring of last year, we formed an actual bully suicide work group. So we didn't want to call it a committee because we only met a few times. And we decided to take a more proactive approach to bullying. So at the K-5 level, we knew that the social worker was doing some PBIS lessons that included being safe, responsible, respectful, how to deal with being sad, how to be a good listener. Those kind of things were already happening at the elementary school, but there wasn't much happening at that 6 through 12 level. So with 31A funding, that at-risk funding, we did buy a bullying prevention kit that was designed for 6 through 12. And Mr. Hemick.
Okay. After reviewing a couple of videos, the committee decided to focus on 2 videos particularly. The first one being a cyberbullying lesson, and the second one being a bully bystander. We ran those lessons on our 2 half-a-days, one in September and one in October. Each lesson had a learning target or learning objective. They had guiding questions. Then the teacher showed the video, and then after that, they had a follow-up activity based on the video. So we ran those 2 days. Prior to that, we did a focus group. Myself, I wasn't there for the first focus group. Prior to that, with Mrs. Pastor, I had a focus group with 9 of our students, and then we had a post focus group afterwards. Along with those bullying units, I know we had a lot of good feedback from our staff. Myself, Mr. Kemp, and our counselors went around at time and talking with our students and staff, and there was a couple staff members that continued it. When we did it on the 21st, they continued it on the 22nd because they ran out of time. So it was a very engaging activity for our students. Along with that, our health students, our 6th grade health students, have the majority of our 6th graders have a health class. There are about 8% of our students that don't, based on schedule and if they have band or chorus. They have a bullying unit focused in there, so you have about approximately over 90% of our students do get that lesson for 6th graders also. Also with that, Mrs. Pastor talked about the PBIS program. This is our 2nd year with the PBIS program at the middle school, and we are focusing on, we have those lessons throughout that being safe, responsible, and respectful. Last year, we started the WEB program, Where Everyone Belongs, where we have 8th grade students, our mentors to our 6th grade students, and we have activities throughout the year, and usually our first day of school for our 6th graders, they have a program where they have the 8th graders and their WEB leaders have activities for them, tour the building, and talk to them about what it is to be at Davison Middle School. Also, myself and Mr. Kemp have grade level meetings, and that's one of the things we're going to be focusing on before break and after break with our PBIS, is talking with our students, being responsible, respectful, and being safe. Mrs. Bias and Mrs. Kroll, they're part of our PBIS team, went to a conference, Defeat the Label Conference in Oakland County on October 26th. This is a program where they talk about we're going to try to bring them into February, end of January, February. It's a free assembly. We don't know how we're going to do it. We don't know if we're going to do all grades at one time or just break them down by grade level in the auditorium, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. But when they come in, they talk about the differences between bullying and teasing, ways to recognize the bullying, and learning effective interventions and skills. So, and again, this is an assembly we would have for our students, and it is free of charge. So that was one of the real good positives for that. I know Mrs. Pastor will talk to you about a challenge, but the universal challenge that not only Davison has, but universally, is students and teaching our students to use social media responsibly. You know, we have a problem with that universally. You know, and that's we're dealing with that on a daily basis, and we reiterate to our students, you know, what is responsibly using social media.
So when I did the focus group, the pre-focus group, the kids really do know the difference between bullying, especially the 9 that we had, the difference between bullying and teasing. They do know what cyberbullying is, but they almost all of them admitted that at one point or another they sent a text that made someone else sad, and that's the way it was framed. At the end, at the post, we asked them how they felt about the 2 lessons. Do they think it was a good use of time? They were very positive about the lessons, about the conversations. The challenge, I think, and even as adults, was the bystander piece, and that one of the activity sheets that they actually left with was, here are some things you can do as a bystander, and they still said, I might be uncomfortable in certain situations because the bully might be back on me, or some other things. So that was the saddest part, is that they really felt like they wouldn't always step in, and that they would be a bystander sometimes. They really did know that there was a bullying policy at Davidson, but weren't sure there was a cyberbullying policy. So communication is really going to be the key to make sure that Mr. Hemmick and Mr. Kemp continue to share those appropriate ways to communicate with one another. At the high school level, we are doing some bullying lessons in health, and every student 9th through 12th grade does get health. Our group, when we met last in April, chose our follow-up meeting as January 22nd, which sounds kind of weird to book in maybe it was May that we booked in January, but we're meeting January 22nd at 3:45 to sort of talk about where are we, what have we done, and what might we do next. And it might be that we talk a little bit more about the suicide part of whether or not where those lessons are being done and where it might be appropriate, and not necessarily suicide lessons, but how to deal with being sad and those things that we know kids face on a regular basis.
One of the things that I think came out of that was to have the teachers teach a lesson, or at least talk about it at the beginning of the year. Did that happen?
So what happened was the students had a
We ran both. We ran 2 lessons, one on September 21st and one on October 6th. Mrs. Pastor and I talked about what would be an effective way to have the lessons, but now also not interrupt, you know, their instruction time. So those half days we thought was the best way of getting those lessons across.
So the kids actually started off with those lessons,
Correct.
And then they adjusted the rest of their day accordingly.
Yep. So the first half a day we ran at first and second hour, and then the second half a day the week later we ran at third, fourth hour. Yep.
And I wanted to add that, you know, I was on that group, and the teachers that were part of that group they were so optimistic and ready to do it. You know, it was something that was discussed that they wanted to do, so that was a good, positive outcome.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the board? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Creation, Superintendent Report.
I have a couple of things tonight, and I am going to pass out some information for my second item. One thing is we did do some updates to the 5-year plan. The board had asked about including the funding source. So the updated, and what's coming around right now is not what I'm talking about right now. The 5-year plan has been updated to include the funding source. There's a new category there. We also made some adjustments in the body of the 5-year plan to include some of the activities or where Asher fits in. If you remember, Asher was determined to be a priority school, and it continues to be on the priority list, and we had to do a 3-year plan for that. So Asher has been included. You won't necessarily see the word Asher in here. Any place that it says 912 or 612, the high school grades do include the Asher Alternative Program. In some places, if it's an initiative that Asher is not yet involved in, it might say Southgate Anderson High School. So that's how we differentiate that. So the new 5-year plan that you have includes funding source. It includes Asher. And Beacon is in there. Any place that you see K-5, the corresponding grades at Beacon are included, 612, whatever. And then finally, there are going to be some changes in the coming months. One of the things that we realized when we really looked at this is we have some initiatives that are starting in the high school and then working backwards, going high school, middle school, elementary. Some of our initiatives are starting in the elementary, going elementary, middle school, high school. And then when you look at the middle school, who's in the middle of that, they ended up with an excessive number of initiatives to implement in the same year. So in a variety of settings in the coming months, we're going to shift that just a little bit so that it's a little bit more spread out for the middle school. But you do have an updated 5-year plan in your materials. And that document, as a reminder, is a living, breathing document. It is on the agenda of every ad staff and will be frequently included in your board materials to give you updates on. The document that I passed around is the uncertified count data for the district. It's not yet certified, but this is fairly accurate. So you need to take a deep breath because the number that I'm going to start with sounds rather terrifying because of some changes that we did very intentionally. So the FTE loss from fall of 16 to fall of 17 to the district is approximately 345 FTEs. The first category that I have in there is from a starting point of 345 FTE loss. The first thing that we want to look at is that approximately 96 of those FTEs were the result of our decision to eliminate the private non-public teachers and the transitions program, which was a little bit smaller program that was housed at Beacon. So we were previously servicing the equivalent of 96 students, which we are not now, but we also have the complete elimination of staffing for those programs that will certainly mitigate much of that loss. The second category is from the fall of 16 to the fall of 17. We have a loss of 71 FTEs specifically for Asher, and that is what we call the pupil portion of the Asher programs. And those are students who are 16 to recently extended to 21 who are considered alternative high school students and would be working for a high school diploma. We recognized that that decreasing trend several years ago, and last January, we made significant cuts in the staffing at Asher, if you will recall, and we laid teachers off because we knew that even as early as last February, we were going to see a pretty significant decrease. We expected that decrease to continue. Some of the things that are related to the downsizing of the Asher pupil portion of their programming is that many of the area districts are now providing alternative programs for their own students. They no longer send nearly the number of students to our program that they did. So for instance, Trenton and Flat Rock and Woodhaven and Huron have all in the last few years started a credit recovery or some sort of alternative program. They are keeping their students in their district. Another factor for some of the decrease in enrollment is because Asher is now considered a priority school, we had to change the enrollment procedure. We could no longer just accept pretty much any student who may want to attend because the graduation rate and the poor attendance rate and some of the behavioral issues that were coming into the school. We now have a screening process to make sure that students who are attending Asher are truly ready to attend school. And so there are a small number of students who we have determined are not yet ready to participate in the Asher program. So there's a small number decrease there. The other change is that when we started looking at the data that ended up with us being considered a priority school, the graduation rates, and I've talked about that before, by the time a lot of students get to Asher, they're already behind in so many credits that they can't possibly make that 4 or 5 year cohort, so they would count against us for graduation rate. Attendance is often a problem. We were accepting students from very far away, sometimes out of the county, who were day-to-day on whether or not they had transportation. Frankly, some of them were day-to-day on whether or not they had a roof over their heads. And so since Mr. Samborski has been there, one of the things that we've taken a serious look at is those students who turn 18 and are now perhaps eligible to consider a GED program. If you are 18 and you've already been 4 years since you enrolled as a 9th grader and you only have 2 or 3 of the necessary credits, you're looking at another 3 to 4 years before you can possibly graduate. So some of those students have switched to a GED track where they can complete the GED in a much shorter period of time. Obviously, the concern is always that a GED is not necessarily a great endpoint for everyone because there still are some limitations in terms of what kind of employment or post-secondary opportunities there are for you with a GED. So the other part of the priority plan and just the whole reworking of Asher in general is that, again, some of those 18, 19, 20-year-olds that may have previously been in the alternative high school completion program are now in a GED completion program that is matched with something else. We have a lot of newly formed partnerships where we are sending those students right from a GED completion and linking them with a post-secondary additional education or skills training, job opportunities, that sort of thing. So a lot of those students then flip to the other side and now they're called a participant, and that side of the program is funded largely through the Adult Education 107 grant or some other state and federal grants that we have. We took just a really quick look at where we believe we are financially with the decrease in enrollment and the cuts that we made last January. And in this fall, there were a few additional resignations that we did not replace. Until we have the actual amended budget completed, we won't know for sure, but it looks as though we're at least at a break-even point on that. But we'll certainly be taking a look at that and then determine whether or not there's any additional staffing cuts that would have to be made before second semester. So that's the Asher portion of it. Continuing down, we also experienced a loss of 116 FTEs simply from the difference of we are now graduating classes that are significantly larger than the incoming kindergarten classes. And we know those things. We have that information, and we can now track and predict that. So the class of 17 that just graduated was approximately 116 students larger than the incoming kindergarten class. So when you subtract those numbers from that 345 loss, the number that I really took a look at that caught me a bit by surprise, not surprise, but always some concern, is additional loss of 62 students that did not return to the district, although even that 62 number, that includes 29 less, a total of 29 less students between the ECDD program and our kindergarten class. So our kindergarten enrollment is again smaller than it was last year. So when I got down to that number of minus 62, then I really wanted to look and see, okay, of students that were enrolled with us last year and just did not return, is there a particular grade or a particular transition where we have something significant going on? I don't see much in a particular area yet. That the kindergarten class is down by 23 from last year, even including the 2 transitional kindergarten classrooms. We have to count those as kindergartners, but next year they'll be in kindergarten, so therefore what is currently our kindergarten class rolling up to first grade is going to be smaller yet, because about 35 of those students come out and go to kindergarten rather than first grade. But again, those are known things that we can plan for. So just across the board, just to kind of give you some indication, as I look at what we call the roll-up. So this is as you go from kindergarten to first grade to second grade. I'll just give you a sense of our loss. We're down 6 for the ECDD. The kindergarten is 23 smaller. First grade is 16 smaller, but that's accounted for. That's 16. That's our TK class that stayed in kindergarten. So from there, moving into second grade, we gained 8 students. Into third grade, we lost 4. Into fourth grade, we lost 6. Into fifth grade, we gained 5. Into sixth grade, we lost 5. Into seventh grade, we lost 10. Into 8th grade, we lost 3. Into 9th grade, we lost 2. Into 10th grade, we gained 9. But some of that is offset by into the 11th grade, we lost 22. That's a year when the high school may consider reclassifying, because if a student has not done well in their core classes and is behind in credits, you may not want them to remain an 11th grader. You may not want them to qualify as an 11th grader, because then they're going to be required to take the state test. So from time to time, there is a possibility that we would reclassify and retain you in the records as a 10th grader 2 years in a row to get you better prepared to take the M-STEP. And then going from 11th to 12th grade, we lost 3. So again, I'm not seeing any place where I would necessarily say, ooh, what's going on as we move from that level or from that grade to the other. So that's the data that I have so far, and certainly I can look at this and get you additional information if you'd like me to look at it a different way. I think the big question is always, what's the financial impact of that? And that will be information that'll be shared with me fairly quickly as we get the amended budget completed. And if I believe that that we're coming up short and we need to make any adjustments to staffing or programming, I would let the board know very soon.
May I say something about Priority School in Asher? I just want to remind you that Asher as an alternative school is looked at the same as traditional schools. They're according to the ESSA Act, Every Student Succeeds Act, alternative education programs are supposed to be on a different playing field and considered different for different reasons. And right now, the state is still continuing to compare Asher to Anderson and the surrounding high school. So we continue to push the MDE to re-look at those things and.
There is language in there that says it is going to change, but we've not heard when or how that's going to change. So my expectation is for this year, they will be assessed again, just like Anderson High School.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Koopser?
Ms. Creasy, is it related to the report out that you had, and as we talk about FTEs, it sounded like a lot of the reduction increases were offsetting to each other. I was curious, as the numbers that you reported to us, was that enrollment or was that student count day, as one relates to finances and the other one doesn't?
This is FTE, which is not necessarily students, because if you have 2 half-time students, they count as 1 FTE. So I can't say that that's necessarily enrollment. So for instance, at Beacon, we currently have an FTE of 140. Beacon is actually up a few students from a year ago, but they have more than 140 students because they have any number of part-time students. I'm not sure if that's what you were asking.
That's not what I was asking. I know that, let's say at any given day, let's say we might have 25 students in a classroom. But the FTE that's counted that will impact finances will be how many students were there on the count day for us to get our FTEs. So my question is that when you were reporting the numbers as it related from grade to grade, was that the FTEs from count day, or is that the number of students that would be in those classrooms?
Everything that I gave you is the number from the worksheet of FTEs from count day.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, moving on to board president update. One of the things that we had available to us was the Wayne County Community Association of School Boards general meeting, and Mr. Estimer and myself had a speaker, Dr. Paul Sala, and he discussed the changes in the legislation for expulsion. So that was a good meeting that we went to. And I also, for the board, want to kind of alert you that I've contacted Ms. McCarthy at MASB for the board self-assessments. That's usually done at the end of the year. And when that's done, they open up a system online, so the board members, each board member has to take the assessment, and the very last board member that takes the assessment, it'll close, and then a summary will be made for us, and a report will be sent to us. So just keep that in mind if you forget to do that, or that will occur probably within the next couple of months, next month, before the end of the year. Okay, moving on to citizen comments. I don't have anything at this time. Moving on to consent. Can I have a motion to approve the consent?
Madam President, I make a motion that we have consent for items L1 through 3.
Support.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Green and a support by Mr. Craig. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Moving on to action, superintendent appointment. Discussion on that, item, please.
So as we talked about during a work session at the last meeting, it was the intention of the board that I place an action item before you tonight that represents a move to appoint Jill Pastor as the superintendent of schools for the Southgate Community School District, pending mutually agreed upon terms of the superintendent contract. And I think anyone who was at the meeting last time is aware of the fact that that this is the recommendation of the cabinet of Southgate Schools.
Okay, any discussion from the board? Okay.
I'll make a motion to move to appoint Jill Pastor as the superintendent of schools for the Southgate Community School District, pending mutually agreed upon terms of the superintendent contract.
Second.
Okay, now I'll open up for any comments or discussion by the board. I would just like to say for the parents who may be watching, or anyone who's trying to figure out what the process was on behalf of the board, Myself, my experience with the superintendent searches have been lengthy, time-consuming, and also doesn't warrant any good results. Sometimes it's been 2 or 3 searches I've been a part of, and it's very difficult to find good, qualified people in around the area, and even from long distances as well. And so this choice was vetted by the board, and as I mentioned before in my comments, that Mrs. Pastor has been an integral part of Southgate Community Schools with the curriculum department, and she has experience as a principal, and there's a lot of experience working through the district as we have changed, and over the past few years we've gone through a lot of transitions and changes and so many different little moving pieces that she's been a part of, that I feel like it's important to make this decision, and I support the appointment of Mrs. Pastor. Any other discussion? Okay. I have a motion by Mr. Craig and a support by Mr. Green. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Point of order, this would be something that we would want to do a roll call vote on.
Okay. Can I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Mr. Estheimer?
Yes.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Koopser?
Yes.
Mr. Freitas?
Yes.
Ms. Reed?
Yes.
Dr. Pomponio?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, motion passes.
Ms. Pastor?
Congratulations.
The first contract, we're offering you 0, just so you know.
Good.
Negotiating from a position of power.
Okay, moving on to employee representatives. Do we have any employee representatives? Okay, information and announcements from the board.
I have one. Madam President, Friday will be the book fair at Grogan. Is that Ms. Altizer, I'm correct? Am I right? Yes? No? What? What are we doing Friday? Okay, we are doing something Friday at Grogan. Bingo for books, that's what it is. I knew it was something. Bingo for books. Thanks for the help, by the way. Friday, for any parents watching that did not get the memo, that Grogan Elementary School from 6 to 8:30 will have bingo for books. It is $5. Every child will go home with at least 3 books. It is a wonderful event. I've been there before. I just forgot what it was called until recently. And that is it. I wish everybody a happy week. No, not Thanksgiving, not yet.
For our next board
Oh,
meeting.
yeah, you're right. Happy Thanksgiving. I'm all messed up. I'm done.
Thank you. Mr. Koopser, do you have some?
Oh, no, just that I will not be able to attend next board meeting.
Oh.
So just if you can make note of that, due to a work obligation.
Okay, so the next item is work session. We have the Board of Education goals. Did we want to focus on one goal, or did we want to, I think what the discussion was we were going to take one goal at a time in each work session and cover that.
Madam
So-
President, if you would be so kind as to maybe review the transportation goal again, because I'm not really sure that I left the presentation knowing for sure what the next step might be for the board if there is going to be additional discussion.
Okay, then we'll focus on the transportation goal. The goal we have that was outlined was that we wanted to determine the cost and possible funding sources over the next 6 months to move that option somewhere down the road for a reinstatement of student participation, but not to state that we're bringing transportation back, but the goal is to review the options. So that's what we want to discuss. And I think part of what we were looking at when we talked about the RFP was to kind of have a discussion in the Finance Committee, some of the topics
Yes.
that we were bringing up, and then bring it to the Finance Director. Does anyone have any questions or input that we want to add?
It's the most succinct goal out of all of them.
It is.
I would say that. It's about 25 words long.
We never got paid for the minute or per word
No,
or per
no,
letter,
okay.
so it was simple. Mr. Craig and myself, our thought was to explore the option of bringing busing back at a limited basis, and just to explore the cost and see what that would entail and how it would impact other things like athletics and different aspects of the community. So we'd just like to get some numbers, see what we're up against, and what it would cost to do that.
Just a point on that, that this is a good time to try to tap into the opportunity as it relates to the RFP, because we don't currently have anyone in the district that has experience or probably time or necessarily the expertise, like, to figure this out, if we were to try to, determine routes and students and cost and that sort of thing, we no longer have, anyone familiar with experience in transportation. So we will need outside assistance in trying to determine even the most general of costs. And so whatever opportunities we have right now as we're looking to renew the contract for our current level of transportation, we need to seize those opportunities to get some assistance with information.
Mr. President?
Mr. Kipser?
As it relates to the RFP and the effort to do that work on behalf of the district, how much are we paying when we're going to do the RFP, the work, the review, and would us adding to this be substantial? I'm just curious if, as we talk about the cost for them to do this work on our behalf, can we get to the same ends with an RFI, and would that be less expensive? Just curiously, or we would have to ask them, I'm sure, how much more it would add to this cost. So could you answer, how much does it cost them first off? Sorry.
So they are going to do the RFP process with us for a cost that currently not to exceed $12,900. Based on our discussions this evening, I will follow up with Amy Cesina and see what additional costs might be based on our discussions, or if I can wait until after our finance committee meeting and see what areas we're looking at or what options we're looking at, and then maybe at that time see if there would be an additional cost. I'm not sure that there would be. They're going to use the same information. So the list that she referred to in the presentation, she talked about some of the reports I have to give her. I also have to give her a map of the district and where our school locations are. And they will use that to design the RFP process. Our school calendar, the starting and ending times of each of our buildings. So they're going to have all that information anyways. So
it just seems as though it's a separate scope of work as it relates to the existing transportation needs, and the information, the analysis, and the buildup and developing of that scope of work may be costly. That's a fairly, usually a big piece of it usually.
I'll do a follow-up with Amy tomorrow.
Okay.
And provide that information to the board. If she has an idea of at what point when we incur additional costs and what, if there's any kind of range of additional costs for services, different services.
I think that'd be good to be reported to the board before the next finance committee.
Yes.
Thanks.
Mr. Craig?
I think for the most part, it wouldn't be that much more. I mean, we're not talking about them going out and doing a ton of extra work. They're just going to
and built
vendors
into
for
their
prices.
current price is doing a lot of legwork.
They're doing a lot of
Legwork.
legwork already.
Right,
For not to
right.
exceed 12,000.
Right.
I can't believe it would be that much more to roll these RFPs in, and,
I don't believe so, but I will definitely
Yeah.
confirm.
okay, I
Or at least
appreciate
get
that.
if she has an idea.
So you mentioned they do the mapping of transportation needs. Do they figure out what the congestion is or what the most?
No, but based on what we would like, the options that we would like them to look at, they will have the map to determine mileage, distance, things, to travel time, things like that, which will affect the price.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Do you have something?
Not sure if it answered the direction she is looking for as it related to. what the board's.
We'll know better once we get
Yeah,
to the
just,
finances.
I just wanted to make sure that everyone, mostly the viewing audience, understands that this is not, figuring this out on our own is not an option. We don't have the personnel to try to, say, okay, here's all the routes, here's where we would do this, and then hand it over in terms of, trying to cost it out. That we're going to need assistance for figuring this out. But that's far different for, depending on all your different options. At one time, we did have an option where at the secondary level, there were neighborhood stops. And that's pretty easy for anybody to figure out. You just have to determine how many families would access those neighborhood stops. That's different than attempting to transport all of your students and, picking them up in the neighborhoods and that sort of thing. We'll need some help with that. But hopefully some of the transportation providers would be motivated to figure some of that out for us if they were interested in gathering our business in the future.
Okay, sounds good. If there's no other questions, can I have a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Support.
Thank you.
All in
Have a good
favor?
evening.
Oh, you gotta
All in
vote.
favor? All in favor?
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you.